The changes in size and shape of the early elevator parallel the development of prairie grain farming. The grain elevator was a simple structure, whose shape became an integral part of the prairie landscape. It appeared near the end of the 19th century and bloomed during 2 world wars. Now, at the close of the 20th century, it is disappearing. These wooden buildings, numbering almost 6,000 at their peak, were the focus of prairie life for more than 100 years. They were developed to serve as collection points for the shipment of grain, part of the triad of farmer, elevator, and railroad. Each of these 3 was indispensable to the prairie economy. Elevators were spaced about 8 miles apart along the railroad lines, a day's return trip for a horse-drawn wagon. Homes and farming-related businesses sprang up around them, usually on the opposite side of the track, and became villages and towns. Simple wooden structures, they followed a familiar pattern. The grain was weighed and unloaded into a pit. A single-cylinder gasoline engine powered a vertical conveyor belt called the leg. This elevated the grain to the top porch, where a distribution system fed the grain to selected bins. The leg also raised the grain from these bins to the top. From there, it was directed by gravity to the railroad cars when they became available. Elevators made loading grain easier, cheaper, and quicker. They were practical buildings. Their outside shape was determined by the work that went on inside. Because of their imposing height, they assumed a dominant presence in the villages and towns. Selected for aptitude and ability to get along, the elevator agents played an important role in the rural community. As well as operating the elevators, they were the middlemen between the farmers, the elevator, and the railroad companies. They were buyers and salesmen. After World War II, several factors simultaneously affected the elevator business. Farms became larger and more mechanized. No longer were farmers limited to hauling grain 8 miles with horses or trucks. Decades of improvements made farm machinery more reliable, and less physical effort was needed. Rural electrification was completed. Farmers were able to work more land for longer hours in greater comfort. Bigger trucks carrying more grain could travel further to bigger, more efficient elevators. Shopping for the best competing price became a possibility. Larger towns with more elevators and services were within easy reach. As the years passed, the design of the elevator was modified. The basic leg was retained, sometimes doubled. Annexes were added alongside the elevator to enable the storage of more grain. The improvements were in size and building methods. Steel, poured concrete, slanted bins, and other ideas changed the appearance. Internal improvements in weighing, humidity testing, grading, and speedier grain handling accentuated the differences between old and new. By the 60s, most towns had grown around the rail tracks. The latest elevator designs required longer sidings. The increased length could only be obtained beyond the town limits, and this isolated them from the townspeople. Slowly, the oldest and smallest elevators handled less grain. Worn out and uneconomical, they fell into disuse. Some were converted into feed and seed mills. Some were relocated to larger centers or twinned with new, larger elevators. Some were abandoned, others were destroyed. Many rail branch lines became unprofitable. Small towns began to shrink as people left to find jobs. Banks and schools closed. Stores shut down as business dwindled. As each elevator was lost, as each mile of track was torn up, as small farmers went out of production, and as hamlets and villages disappeared, the rural landscape and lifestyle changed. Those who remained struggled to retain their local elevators. Threatened by the loss of family farms because of high costs and low grain prices, farmers and town residents look for permanence. The elevator has always been there. If it remains, perhaps they can too. However, unused elevators take up valuable land. Their vacant and shabby appearance speak of an era that has ended. Companies find it necessary to destroy them. This is how one of them met its end, blown apart by well-placed explosive charges. The mixture of dry grain dust and air set up by the explosions provided a spectacular end to a more prosaic career. The wood cannot be reused as construction lumber because the removal of thousands of nails is too labor-intensive. Also, the wood is so dry and hard, it is difficult to drive nails. A recent alternative is to recycle the wood by converting it to particle board. Other elevators are pushed over. Across the prairie provinces, many communities celebrate their heritage. Here in Ericana, Alberta, people gather and for a day relive the past. An important part of our history, elevators and old farm machinery evoke feelings that go beyond nostalgia. Elevators first appealed because they were practical. Their simplicity and height were striking as they broke the flat monotony of the land. They had a dignity which endeared them to prairie dwellers. Few of us are immune to fear of the unknown, and often deny that life is a cycle of beginnings and endings. By collecting and saving the old, we seek to make our world more permanent. So a few old elevators escape destruction. They become part of historical parks or become museum buildings. A glance through family albums reveals amateur photographers find the elevator a favorite subject. Garbed in the colors of the different companies, elevators inspired writers, painters, and photographers. From a distance, the elevator's size and straight lines express dignity and stability. The single colors take on a radiance in the clear prairie light. Brent Laycock, an Alberta artist, emphasizes these aspects. He paints more detailed and closer views of elevators than adjoining buildings. The added lines, shapes, and colors suggest a busy workplace. Laycock shows another dimension, that of usefulness. As the 21st century approaches, elevators will be fewer and further apart, the result of an evolving world. The seemingly immovable, impressive wooden giants of another age will be long remembered. Let's take a minute to share these images of elevators which, through time, have come to mean so much.